segunda conferencia que nos ofrece Kari Polanyi. Para quienes no estuvieron la vez pasada con nosotros, Kari Polanyi es una persona que no necesita presentación, porque a lo largo de casi más de toda su vida ha hecho una reflexión muy profunda del libro de su padre, Kari Polanyi, que es La Gran Transformación. Entonces, quiero presentarles el libro porque es una lástima que muchos de nuestros estudiantes no hayan leído este libro, y me parece en este momento que es fundamental, sobre todo en los últimos 3 capítulos, donde habla sobre todo el proceso de previo al fascismo en Europa. Entonces, si uno lee el libro de Kari Polanyi, va a ver cómo sustenta él el aspecto teórico-metodológico de lo que viene a ser la Gran Transformación desde el siglo XIX hasta la Segunda Guerra Mundial, que es cuando termina su libro, y posteriormente Kari retoma algunos ensayos de su padre, pero además los transforma en sus palabras para escribir este libro que se llama De la Gran Transformación a la Financiarización. Cabe hacer mención que, bueno, en esta escuela pues es importantísimo no solamente tener una visión social de la economía, pero también lo que viene a ser el proceso de diferenciación es importantísimo para poder entender lo que sucede, sobre todo en esta gran crisis que se inicia, diríamos, a partir del 2006, pero que comprende el periodo de una nueva gran recesión, y se anuncia la deflación. Cosa que, les digo, es importante leerlo porque en los últimos 3 capítulos se habla sobre la inflación, la deflación, pero su relación con el fascismo, y que esto está reflejado, ¿verdad?, en las manifestaciones sociales en Europa. Le voy a dar la palabra a Kari Polanyi. A ella le interesa muchísimo que ustedes tomen nota y que hagan preguntas. Lo que más le interesa es la discusión con ustedes. Bien, bienvenida, Kari.
Thank you, Alicia. And thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. This book, which is recently published with the title From the Great Transformation to the Great Financialization, consists of a set of essays, of which the first 8 were really various occasions in which I have written or spoken about the importance of the work of my father, Kari Polanyi. And the rest of the book is about the title of it. That is basically the crisis, the nature of the crisis, which we may say started with the financial meltdown of 2008. I believe that it is not possible to understand the nature of this crisis or to address the really big questions regarding as to what possibilities the crisis opens for the future, for the countries of the North, for the countries of the global South, without adopting a much wider historical approach, at least to the crisis of the 1930s, but I actually would argue that it is time for us in economics to look at the larger trajectory of capitalism from its beginnings in the mercantilist era, from the conquest, from roughly 1500, then the great explosion, if you wish, of the Industrial Revolution and of the colonialism and imperialism, I have half an hour to present. I'm only indicating to you that my thesis here is that the heartlands of capitalism, which are in Europe, North America, to a lesser degree in Japan, have exhausted their historical mission with respect to the enormous increase in productivity of the production of goods and transportation, etc., and that they have in a way reverted, that the financialization is a reversion to the origins of this capitalism in commerce and conquest. So my argument would be that what we now see in the United States, in Britain, and in Europe it is a regression of a very well-functioning capitalist order, the kind that is called the 30 golden years, from 1945 to 75, the kind that was informed by Keynesian policies and which represented a compromise, whereby capital was restricted in very many ways, externally by capital controls, and by the fact that full employment, not economic growth, but full employment was the principal social and economic objective of that era, and it was supported by a very large welfare system. So we had a new model, a model of capitalism different from that which collapsed in 1914, but it was not sustainable. In 1970 was a crisis, very complicated, but briefly, I would say it was a crisis that was predicted by Michael Kalecki, in the sense that he thought that many years of full employment would so increase the power of labor that the capitalist class would find it intolerable. And briefly, that is what happened in the United States in the last years of the 1960s, the early years of the 1970s, and is what created the basis for the neoliberal counter-revolution, so-called. And then there was a reversal whereby the power of labor, which in the United States had reached, could be measured by the share of wages in the national product, it had become very low, lower than any time since the 1930s. And the share of labor now, forgive me, I'm sorry, very high share of labor. And from that time on, the share of labor has diminished. The increase in productivity from 1980 to the present has gone, as I think you're well aware, to the top part of the income distribution, the top 10%, the 1%, point something 1%. We have seen an enormous maldistribution of income in the period of financialization. Now we know that in the 1990s, there was an appearance that the neoliberal policies were effective. It appeared to be also because in the United States there was an artificial boom, basically fueled by an enormous amount of bank lending. Not only in the famous mortgage market, but there was an asset inflation process which in America appeared to herald the great success of this neoliberal model. The unemployment rate, unbelievably, in the US was down to 4%, and these are the Clinton years. But of course, we know that this was built in a way that it was bound to collapse on a bubble, and it did. Now, what I am suggesting that, therefore, in the United States and in Europe, including Britain, we have a secular stagnation. They talk all the time about the recession is over because the next quarter or the next 2 or 3 are positive growth rather than negative. But the long-term prospects of the foreseeable future are really of a very low rate of growth and possibly another financial collapse, very possibly. This together with a very, very, very serious maldistribution of income, so that I think some of you know the statistics. Basically, in the last 20 or 30 years, most of the increases in productivity have all gone to the top. So we have a financialization, we have a maldistribution of income, we have a stagnation. We have in Europe an even worse situation because we have there also a political crisis. And it is, the problem there is because, in my opinion, the governments have been captured. Government has been captured by financial markets. I put it as simply as that. The crisis in Europe was ultimately due to the fact that the banks had made a lot of loans, and in the conditions of recession, the banks had to be rescued, and the way they were rescued was by creating sovereign debts and forcing the population in various ways to pay for the rescue of the banks. Now, very interestingly, when the crisis appeared in 2008, it was said, because it is always said when there is a crisis, that the developing world is going to, the poor people in poor countries are going to feel the worst effects of the crisis. And what was very interesting is that really this is not what happened. What happened is that in the wake of that crisis, 2008, for the first time, not quite in its history, but for the first time for a long, long time, the International Monetary Fund had to gather up all their resources to assist countries in Europe. The IMF was not, with the exception of Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, which I call the southern periphery of the United States, very closely integrated with the United States. No other country in Latin America has asked for assistance from the IMF. Only $6 billion were expended in 30 African countries by the IMF in 2009. That is an extraordinary figure. And in Asia, there were no IMF programs anywhere, with the exception of 3 countries where this was entirely due to populations displaced by war. I'm talking about Afghanistan and Pakistan. I can't remember the third one, but having nothing to do with the crisis. And moreover, because I was following this rather closely in the figures, there was a constant revision by the IMF of the estimates of how serious the crisis was in the North. They constantly had to increase the figures because they were worse and worse than was expected. But they also had to revise the figures for Asia, Latin America, and Africa, where the results were not nearly as serious as had been anticipated. So we have, on the one hand, we have a crisis which I am suggesting is more intractable, more difficult to resolve in the North Atlantic countries than that of the 1930s. We know what happened in the 30s in Europe and in North America. Governments took certain actions. We had closed economies in Europe, national fascist economies, etc. We had a New Deal in the United States. In England, you had the big reaction that came after the war with the introduction of the welfare state. But the governments, and that includes that of the United States, Britain, and the rest of them in Europe, seem to me to be incapable of political reactions and actions of a kind that actually would revive the economies, that would restore purchasing power to the population, that would punish the banks, that would let the banks go bankrupt, that might nationalize them. As I say these things, say, what's the matter with her? She's dreaming in color. Well, I'm only spelling out some of the things that could be done theoretically, but politically appear to be impossible. Now, the other thing that was revealed at that time, as I said, is that the impact of the crisis on the rest of the world, on the Asia and Latin America, Africa, was not as severe as had been expected. And now, in the case of Asia, and I don't speak of China alone, but what they call developing Asia, which is over half the population of the world, you had an average rate of growth from 2000 to 2010 or 11 of 8% per annum. 8% per annum, 30 years of population over 0.5% of the world. Now that is an impressive fact. Right? Now some people like to say, oh, that's only economic growth. That is a massive, massive phenomenon. And of course includes China, whose 3 decades of economic growth at about 10% and 16-fold increase in product is a, as far as I'm concerned, a historic phenomenon of in a 21st century industrial revolution that is a very, not only a great achievement, but obviously is going to have very big consequences. Now, the situation then, as I see it, is that there is an enormous concentration of financial wealth and financial power in the capitalist heartlands. There is an enormous concentration also of the power of the transnational corporations, mostly centered in the same capitalist heartlands, which incidentally are very much merging. You can see the common interests, United States, Britain, France, in many ways. You can see it in the wars which they mutually support in the Middle East. And there is the mighty military capacity of the United States. So it would appear to many people that that system is more powerful than ever, that it has more concentrated wealth than ever, and it has also enormous military capacities. But I think that if one looks at the wider, longer historical view, this is a mirage, because the societies of these North Atlantic powers, which dominate the international system, they dominate, of course, the World Bank and the IMF, to some extent even the United Nations, although that should not be so. But the societies are broken. The social contract that prevailed in those years from 1945 to the mid-70s is broken. It is gone. And you feel that sense of social malaise. The parents in North America, including Canada, expect that their children will have a much harder time in life than they had. The American dream that has kept the United States politically afloat, cemented socially, is in question, certainly in Canada. The failures in Europe to solve the problems have made enormous damage in the countries of the Mediterranean periphery, with youth unemployment in excess of 50%. And in Britain, which claims to be doing very well, you just have an enormous financialization. The latest figure that I saw is that all the regions of England, except London and southeast England, adjoining southeast England, have had a decline in their GDP per capita, and all the growth is concentrated in London and southeast counties, and that is the heart of the huge financial sector, financial services and related, etc., that Britain thinks that they are going somehow to overcome the recession by concentration of financial capital. But I think that is very unlikely. Now, there is another factor to throw into this picture, which I think is not enough mentioned. And that has to do with developments in the labor markets. Because, look, you have a lot of capital, financial capital. Where are they going to invest? Where can this money be invested profitably? Well, we have seen in recent years, we have had investments basically in electronic communication, Google and et al., Apple, Google, Microsoft, et al. They have produced products which in themselves have assisted in the further spread of communication technology. This technology is hugely labor displacing. I think Google itself employs, I think I saw a figure like 140,000 people, or maybe it's fewer than that. That is nothing. There is a movement where they are looking everywhere for innovation. There's the latest game in town, or innovate, startup companies innovate. Much of that is in information technology, but also in artificial intelligence, in robots, in various mechanical means of increasing productivity by displacing labor. And the estimate from an Oxford source, I cannot remember the exact source, but I read in The Economist and quite seriously reported that they expect 46% of all jobs will disappear in the next, I cannot remember whether they said 10 years or 15 years, but not very many years. And the the employment which is threatened is largely white-collar employment, service employment. So there is a huge problem of how this financialized capital is going to produce employment for the population. The issue of the display of labor markets and employment is not confined to the global north, because the globalization and the increasing competition in international markets, which is the trend in which things are moving and are still moving, is a mechanism basically for forcing all firms which engage in this competition to reduce unit costs, to increase productivity, to adopt methods which displace labor. Which is why I called my talk De-Globalization. I don't mean that we can totally roll this back, but I do believe very seriously that positive policies have to look again at the relative social benefit of encouragement of exports as against the encouragement of the domestic market. And that has a lot to do with labor, because you figure that any business that is engaged exclusively in export, as very many have been in this neoliberal globalization, have an interest only in reducing wages. Wages are a cost, period. That is not true of the domestic economy. In the domestic economy, obviously, wages are a cost to firms, but wages are also a source of purchasing power. And that is the case for the increase in minimum wages, the case for the increase in the power of labor as a means of stimulating the economy, as a means of providing employment, is a strong case only in an economy, can be made only in an economy, in my view, that has got solid set of that is domestically integrated. Now, the fact that the demand from Europe and United States is going to be very flat, of course, is going to affect the exports of a number of countries. In my view, this, looking at it strategically and from a historical point of view, is probably a good thing, in the sense that it will produce market pressures to pull back on the degree of exposure to international markets, and it will make it more interesting for governments and policymakers to look into how to improve the domestic market and production for the domestic market, and raise the wages in the domestic market, which also improves purchasing power in the domestic market. And it's an old Keynesian argument, and it's totally feasible. But it is not feasible in an economy that is principally concerned with international competitiveness. And so ultimately we have also to ask what are really the ends of economic policy. I think we have to think a little bit less in terms of how to be competitive, and a little bit more in how to be inclusive and socially inclusive. And I believe that the social malaise, the political malaise, as I say, I see the heartlands of capitalism being financially strong, militarily strong, but politically weak and socially in a crisis. No, the rules of the international system continue to be made by those countries and of the heartlands, I call them, of capitalism, which are relatively in decline in terms of their contribution to world economic production, in terms of their growth rate, and so forth. There is a total misalignment now between the creation of these rules and who they are affected with. And we know the problem, it is not a new problem, but I think it is coming to light. And maybe I would stop there, because I would really love to be able to answer questions. And I know when I spoke here 2 days ago, I just kept on and on and on. There wasn't enough time for questions, so let me stop there a moment. Thanks.
Gracias, Kari. Está la doctora Teresa Aguirre, va a hacer algunos comentarios y después le vamos a dar la palabra a nuestros alumnos.
Mil gracias. Me va a ayudar a traducir para tratar de hacerlo. ¿Qué? Para tratar de hacerlo más ágil. Para mí es un honor estar acá con Kari Polanyi. Soy una gran admiradora de Polanyi desde que leí su libro La Gran Transformación en los años 70, cuando estudiaba la licenciatura en Economía en una facultad de Economía en la que veíamos poco marxismo en la Universidad de Guadalajara. Así es de que era el primer libro crítico que leía sobre lo que me habían enseñado en las materias de micro, macro y demás, y fue toda una revelación. Después, leyendo a Marx, me di cuenta que era un continuador en muchos sentidos de las ideas de Marx, pero también un pensador extraordinariamente original, porque revelaba las grandes tensiones que había traído consigo todo el pensamiento liberal que había predominado en la economía durante 150 años. Y además, a mí me descubrió algo súper interesante que no encontraba en Marx ni en ningún otro pensador, y era la idea de que el dinero era endógeno y no era neutro, a diferencia de lo que planteaba la teoría económica en general. En Keynes ya hay idea de cómo el dinero incide en el crecimiento económico, pero no cómo genera desigualdad entre las economías a nivel mundial. Y para mí esa era una revelación que me arrojaba Polanyi y que ahora es ricamente recuperado en el libro de Kari Polanyi, de la gran transformación a la gran financiarización, este libro que desde mi perspectiva actualiza las ideas de Polanyi para el análisis de las crisis actuales. Ya nos planteaba ahora Kari que es esta tensión que se produce bajo las ideas liberales la que genera un sistema que reproduce la desigualdad de manera acrecentada, que da lugar a una distribución del ingreso desigual y que está generando un malestar creciente en las sociedades, tanto en las desarrolladas como en las atrasadas, y que, al igual que en la crisis de 29-33, las soluciones que se están dando a la crisis desde 2008 parecieran más bien, es una frase que utiliza Kari, patear la lata hacia adelante sin darle verdaderas soluciones a los problemas. Nos plantea que se trata de una crisis muy compleja que tiene manifestaciones distintas en cada país y por lo tanto hace mucho más difícil pensar soluciones globales, sobre todo porque las sociedades también se han fragmentado, se han fracturado. Para crecer las exportaciones, para hacer crecer las exportaciones, se han utilizado como mecanismos la competitividad y la flexibilidad de las relaciones laborales y el manejo del tipo de cambio, tratando de adquirir por estos mecanismos competitividad, pero ello significa reducción y fragmentación de los mercados internos. El caso de México quizá sea en América Latina uno de los más reveladores de los altos costos que tiene esta forma de integración a la economía mundial, porque está generando números absolutos de pobres crecientes y obviamente salarios reales que tienden a la baja, porque nuestra forma de integración con la economía norteamericana se está dando fundamentalmente por este abaratamiento del costo de la fuerza de trabajo. ¿Cómo repensar la reorganización de la economía mundial ante un mundo cada vez más globalizado e interdependiente, cuando las finanzas, las altas finanzas, como decía Polanyi, adquieren tal dominio sobre los gobiernos que parecieran estar por encima de ellos? ¿Qué regulaciones son necesarias y al mismo tiempo qué fuerzas están deteniendo estos cambios? Cuando las sociedades protestan, pareciera que los gobiernos escuchan poco. La democracia está expresando límites para las transformaciones y al mismo tiempo pareciera que es el único camino por el cual se puede transformar. ¿Hacia dónde tendrían que apuntar estas transformaciones? Creo que Kari nos podría desarrollar o nos podría sugerir, porque a lo largo de todo el libro tiene sugerencias sobre hacia dónde apuntan estas transformaciones. Una de ellas dice, tendríamos que repensar la idea de desarrollo. Y muy bien, sí tenemos que repensar la idea de desarrollo. Tendríamos que pensar más en cómo transformar localmente las economías, haciéndolas más solidarias, más distributivas, más basadas en la reciprocidad. Pero ¿es suficiente con eso? ¿Es suficiente con la transformación local o hay que pensar la transformación local de manera paralela a la transformación mundial? ¿Y cuáles serían algunos de los mecanismos que podría orientar esta otra gran transformación que requiere la economía mundial, que de otra manera apunta a un abismo constante, a reproducir las crisis en escalas mayores? La crisis del 97, la crisis del 2000, la crisis del 2008, ahora las crisis europeas. Hacia allá va mi inquietud, Kari. Y mil gracias por estar acá.